The African Trade and Investment Summit that happened in Lagos yesterday was graced by the VIPs, the stakeholders, CEOs in the business community and across the nation. You had someone like Taiwo Idele as one of the keynote speakers, and he raised some critical issues. In fact, let me give you the mind-blowing revelation from Taiwo. Taiwo said that Nigerians, they pay over 200 unofficial taxes. The official taxes are 60. The unofficial, they are 200. Let's start our conversation with that. How do you react to that kind of revelation?
Well, for me, it's not anything new. I don't see it as any new revelation because it's known to us. And we have not stopped emphasizing that in this studio. The fact that you have a very powerful non-state actors who are taking revenue on behalf of the government. And somehow, these are not unknown to the government. If you just take Lagos, for example, and like every other major city in Nigeria, and you see these people who are collecting revenue crudely, whether in the market, whether they're on the road, and the citizens are helpless. And sometimes these are done even in the front of police stations, where government law enforcement officers are. These people are so powerful that government can't even regulate them. And so they are all across the places. So I was saying recently in one of our trainings, and I said, you see, we should stop the idea that Nigerians don't pay tax. The better narrative is that the taxes does not come to the government. So the tax goes into private pockets, in the motor parks, in the market unions and association. Even the one who regulates those who ride Okada and Keke here in Lagos, they all take revenue from these people. For every single passenger that is taken from every bus stop to bus stop, somebody is there to take the revenue. So this may not be going into the government coffers. And so that's the reality we find ourselves, because government has failed and we have not been able to actually regulate or enforce laws within our domain. Now, if you go to the land side, you see land speculators. Here in Lagos, you call them Omonile. Now you see development agencies and unions all across Nigeria. They are all taking revenue from people. But this does not get to the coffers of government. And I think that's where a lot of revenue is actually frittering away. Now imagine that all these collections that are done daily, from Lagos to Ibadan, to Akure, to Edo, to Onitsha, all comes into the coffers of government. We will not be talking about the level of infrastructure decay that Nigeria suffers at the moment.
All right, at the summit yesterday, Taiwo Idele was talking about 81% of Nigerians being unemployed. And he went further to say that the reason why Nigeria's unemployment rates has come down, like the UK, it should actually translate in development, but it's still rated as one of the poorest countries in the world. So he talked about people being employed in areas that are not productive. Now, how can that narrative be changed? Can everybody be a manufacturer or be in other sectors as expected by Taiwo Idele? What exactly does that mean?
Well, I don't know what data that Taiwo is relying on to say that Nigerian employment rate and unemployment rate is equal to that of the UK. You see, except that we want to factor in armed robbers, kidnappers as employed. Now, if there are people who are basically employed, because we don't even have the data to determine who is employed and who is not employed. So it will be foolhardy for us to say that we are at the same rate of unemployment with the UK. Because UK have their data. They know the people who come into UK every day, and they know who does what, where people work. We don't know that about Nigeria. Now, if you take just a sample look at Lagos, for example, and walk around the street in the middle of the day, and you see people who are sitting down, some of them are drinking, doing nothing. You can find that in the UK. So how do we account for these people? And this is all across the major cities in Nigeria. I travel a lot and I see this, where you're seeing army of young people, able-bodied people, not doing anything. We have a lot of people who are carrying applications from one place to the other as young school leavers, and they are not working. So we cannot say that our employment is 4.4% as that of the UK. And so I disagree greatly with that, because we don't have statistics to really determine that. And if Nigeria must know what exactly their unemployment rate is, we must first and foremost ensure that we document every Nigerian and know where they live, where they work, or where they don't work. So that had to be done. Now, but on the fact that 81% of most Nigerians who are working in a productive sector is also a fact that one cannot dispute. You were in the FRC training, and you remember that one of the greater issues that we're talking about is that everybody who came out for that meeting, the emphasis is always that we are talking revenue, because they were wondering that why will government want to take 50% of their revenue and or 100% of their revenue, and government is not minding what they are doing. And we're saying, look, it's not just about revenue, it's how much do you really generate? Because most of the people who are actually in employment are working for government. And those who work for government, they don't produce anything, whether they are indirect or direct goods. So there's no productivity that's happening around that level. That was why yesterday I was still emphasizing here that, look, government need to weed down on the size of its workforce, who are actually not adding value to society. So to that extent, it's understandable that the only productivity that comes from this set of people is the fact that we take tax from their income. But there's no economic activities that they are doing, apart from few agencies of government, that really is involved in active production. So this is where we find ourselves as a nation, and that is what is actually responsible for our inability to mop up revenue. Because if you have a lot of productive activity going on, agencies of government who are creating wealth, who are empowering the economy, we will not be where we are at the moment.
All right, before we call for the track up of the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Tax Reform, which is Taiwo Edele, let's still look at this fact that if 60 are officially approved, 60 taxes officially are approved, and then you have more than 200, be in the system, what does it suggest about our system, and how did we find ourselves in this kind of situation whereby we don't have control over our tax policy, our tax system in Nigeria? What does it suggest about this system and the need to reform them?
When you look at the 2021 Fragility Index in Africa, what you see is that Nigeria is ranked in the first 5 states in Africa that is fragile. Now, what is Fragility Index measuring? The Fragility Index is measuring the inability of a government to actually be in control of the system. So what you're seeing here is the fact that government is not in control. And that's why I keep saying the increasing role and power of non-state actors in Nigeria, people who are bigger than government. That's what we're talking about. And so they are the one who oppresses the people, maybe by means of violence. And you need to go see the crude measure that these people are using in enforcing revenue collection. whether it's in the market, whether it's on the streets, or on the major roads. You see them everywhere. And this is because the state itself, by its nature of its politics, has over-empowered people who are not within the state. Because this is one of the issues, and this is a conversation that we must have. And I was very happy that Taiwo spoke to this issue of appealing to our politicians. It's not just in terms of writing policies. It's also appealing to our politicians to stop empowering individuals who are not state actors with weapons and with money to overpower the state. Because most of the crises that we are dealing with, if we must be fair and sincere to ourselves, are all generated by our politicians. Some years ago, my friend, who is a DSS, there was going to be an election in Edo State, and he told me almost all the hotels in Edo were booked, locked down. Who were there? Members of various secret courts, who politicians have mobilized to help them drive the election process. This is what we see on a daily basis. So when you see a lot of arms and ammunitions flying into the country, politicians are using this to ensure that they get access to power. That's why the struggle for power here is so intense and it's involved a lot of killings. We must not shy away from this fact. And the politicians, they know it. That they are the ones who are empowering these people. Because when you give people guns to help you do elections, and after the election, what happened? Do you recover the guns? What do you think these people will be doing with the gun after? This has been since 1999. And we cannot run away from this fact. So the real basic problem is that we are having politicians who are so desperate in taking power, and they will go any length to get access to power, including the use of force. They take gun and want people not to come out to vote so that their party can win. So all these are in the known, and Nigeria knows it. But the unfortunate thing is that sometimes you also see even the security agencies, and that's why you see all the elections reports from 1999 till date, whether they are the main elections or the all-circle elections, security agencies have consistently been indicted, even in this role. Because if you cannot beat them, what do? You join them. So this is a narrative, this is a trajectory. We find ourselves as a nation that the state does not have the authority to actually control everybody or enforce compliance with basic rules and regulations. So this is why we are here. And if we have to turn this tide, then the state must take its proper place. And we can say today in Lagos, we don't want those boys running around vehicles in Lagos State. But what are you going to see if you arrest them today? Tomorrow politicians go and take them off because they need them to win the next election. This is the tragedy, and this is what Africa needs to deal with. In short, Nigeria needs to deal with. I don't think it's so much like that in other countries of Africa. It's more Nigeria.
All right, talking about what Africa needs. At the summit yesterday, one of the things that were pointed out was the issue of infrastructure deficit in Africa. And according to some of the keynote speakers, its positions, it makes Africa to be at a disadvantaged position. Is there a possibility of this narrative changing quickly?
Of course, the end is not in sight. And I think that is why what Taiwo said yesterday also was fundamental, which is the philosophy of the president that's actually driving the committee. And that is, we don't need to tax our seed. That was a very deep philosophical statement, that we don't need to tax our seed, that we need only to tax our fruits. And he made the example of Enormons, who in 2021 alone paid about $11 billion as his personal income tax to the United States of American government. And he said, using the 460 Naira exchange rate to a dollar, he puts it together and he discovered that what Elon Musk alone paid in 1 year, all the personal income tax in Nigeria put together in 4 years was not equal to it. So this is to tell you And that was why he was emphasizing the fact that government must find a way, and the civil society must also assist in driving this process so that we don't keep taxing our seed. We should allow business to thrive. Except you have not attempted a business, you will see how tax officials are driving you. They are not even, really concerned about whether you are making profit, whether you are selling or not. All they just want is to take revenue from you. And if this become approach, this will make the businesses in Africa less competitive. And I think that's the real issue here. So he was emphasizing that we need to create that ecosystem where Africa, or indeed Nigeria, can become headquarters to big businesses. And then they make money, and then we spend it here. I made that illustration here yesterday also, using the island. All the big companies in the world are having their headquarters in Europe, in Ireland. Why? Because it's a tax haven. And corporate tax is just about 11% in the island. And therefore, you don't want to put your headquarters in Germany, where they are paying for 3%. So you put it in Ireland and you save more money, because the goal of every businessman is to make profit. And as a matter of fact, maximize that profit. So we have a huge issue. Augusto did a survey some years ago to put the deficit in our infrastructure at between 100 and 150 billion US dollars to be spent over a period of 30 years to be able to meet the gap of the infrastructure needs for Nigeria alone. I'm not talking Africa, just Nigeria. So you can imagine that if you multiply that 100 billion in a year for 30 years, you know what that is. So that is what Nigeria needs to be able to meet up its infrastructure need. That's huge. Currently, the entire budget of 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024 is not up to 100 billion. So how are we going to bridge that gap? Where will that money come from? And this is why, for me, the emphasis really, yes, there was so much mention about the manufacturing yesterday, and I don't think that's where the emphasis should be. Because even manufacturing companies are folding up and having difficulty in business everywhere across the globe. It's not just Nigeria. So where is the soft money coming from? We are in a knowledge-driven economy. So the power of the mind is far bigger than the power of the factory. And that's why, for me, really, if Nigeria has to make a significant drive, when we're talking about reimagining growth for Africa, where emphasis must be is knowledge-based economy. Look at it, we're talking about Elon Musk, who is paying 11 billion of tax to America without having a shop anywhere. So this is what we're talking about. It's the power of the mind. Look at Facebook. Look at Google. All these businesses that are driving the economy of the globe as we speak has nothing to do with size of building or size of factory. It's just the ability of people to conceptualize things, be creative and innovative, and this will bring about. And how are we going to get to this level is the fact that the focus for Nigeria is a quality of education. And that must be what the regime must emphasize.
All right. You know, the chairman of the Presidential Task Force Reforms Committee also made reference to the issue of a tax to GDP ratio. I learned the soundbite is ready. So let's take a listen now. Then I guess we'll react to it.
With a high sense of urgency, without compromising diligence, we think that this is something we have to do together. So don't leave it to us. We're just representing you. We're on a mission, and we believe that the Nigeria today that we see is not the Nigeria of our dream. I haven't met one single Nigerian who says, this is my Nigeria. No. If it's not the Nigeria of our dream, then we have to work together to create that Nigeria of our future and of our dream, not tomorrow, starting from today. Like Abraham Lincoln said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you very much.
All right. We just listened to the chairman, Presidential Committee on Tax Reforms, where he talked about the fact that the present Nigeria that you have, looking at the state of the nation now, is not the Nigeria of our dream. How will you react to that?
Well, I cannot agree less. This is not the Nigerian that all of us are looking for. We're looking for a Nigerian that is prosperous. We're looking to a Nigerian that is home to every one of us. A Nigeria where people will be willing to make a living without necessarily having to travel anywhere. If you go to America, I see a lot of Americans who has never left America all their life. And they are comfortable. It's a home to everybody. If you go to the Arab, even when they leave, they go back, they want to come back to their country. They don't want to spend life anywhere. The real reason is because they've created that ecosystem where life is meaningful. Now, I was saying to somebody yesterday, and I asked him, you see, since independence, we can take an X-ray of those who have governed us and see why has Nigeria as a country not have the privilege of having somebody good to lead us? That's a question. And he said to me, but yesteryears was good. I said, because you were not in yesteryears. If you were in 1960, you would have known that 1960 was not good. Because 1963, I remember, or 65, when Lee Kuan Yew came to Africa, he knew that we were going nowhere. He was not in Nigeria. He wrote it in his book, From Third World to First World, chapter 22, his encounter with Commonwealth. How our people were living. And to that very extent, when the coup came in 1966 of January, Lee Kuan Yew said he was not surprised. Because he knew Africa was going nowhere by the way we were driving. Then we have series of coups, coup upon coup. And now when you come to track those who have led us in these past years, from independence to today, now what you see is that we have always been led, as people say, by our worst. And I told the person yesterday, it's not just that we are led by our worst, it's a reflection of what all of us are. So if in a space of over 3 decades, 50 years, we are not able to find one good person who is going to pioneer development,
the issues of climate
we can call the names. So there's no point really having to encourage ourselves that life was better off in the 60s. Yes, you have more money, but you didn't know what to do with the money. Was it not in this Nigeria that were frittering money away and there were no infrastructure, there were no road, and somebody was the president and he didn't know what to do with the money? I said Nigeria was so rich with money and we don't know what to do with money. We even went to Grenada and paid their civil servant salary for 6 months. We've taken on projects which are not ours. While our people are wallowing in poverty, we were in ECOWAS, we were fighting apartheid in South Africa, and we were wasting resources. And these countries in Africa, which we have all supported with all our resources, have never voted for us. Even at the General United Nations Assembly, they have never taken position with us. So this is where, for me, the challenge really is. So this Nigeria we are seeing is not the Nigeria that we are all praying for. Oyedele said something. Now when you look at it, for example, in terms of nature, it's kind to us. Time zone is kind to us. Weather is kind to us. What is underground is kind to us. Everything is good for us. The only thing that is not good for us is governance. And that's where the challenge is. So he says, quoting Abraham Lincoln, the fact is that the only way to predict the future is to create that future. And that's what we will need to do. How do we create that future? We must begin to speak to our children and begin to encourage them. And that for me is where the conversation will need to start. And as a matter of fact, my submission here this morning is that all of us who are 50 years and above should be able to say to our children, we are very sorry because we have failed you. This is not a good life. There is a better life. Because that's the only way to motivate the younger generation so that they will not follow our path. Because if they follow where we are going, where we are coming from, they will end up at the same destination.
All right, looking at creating a new path to progress, the U.S. Commercial Counselor to Nigeria, Julie Blank, at the event yesterday was saying that as the world looks to the future, Nigeria is a key leader on the African continent. You've enumerated how Nigeria supported various African countries, but this time around, they're looking at economic development in the continent, and they see Nigeria as a vital partner to the U.S. in advancing shared values, as they see that what benefits Nigeria benefits Africa and indeed the world. But let's look at what benefits Nigeria benefiting Africa in the economic sense. What would that be?
Well, we've heard this cliche over and over again. Nigeria, the giant of Africa, leader of the continent. And that's a point that I am speaking to. You see, those who drive, for example, our foreign policy, we've gotten to that level where we say, oh, the three concentric circle of the foreign policy direction of Africa. First ECOWAS, second AU, and then, of course, global. That we have to, first of all, look at what is happening in the Economic Community of West Africa. Just look at the coup in Niger. How are they deferring to us? No respect, no regard. Now you check out nations that Americans support. When Americans say this is the way, where do they follow? They move there. So, for you to be able to command influence, you must be strategic in terms of your dealing with your neighbors. And that's what we have not done well. Benin Republic is sabotaging us. Niger Republic sabotages us. And this is known to our people who are in power. When Nigeria make a policy to say this is what we want to do to control our economy, Benin reverses the policy. Because they are feeding through us. Now, do we have the willpower to call them to order? No. So, what you need to do is that you need to build up your power first. When you build up your power, then you are able really to fortify your borders. Then you are in a position to say, well, we can sanction you. Even with all the ECOWAS sanction against Niger Republic, things are still flying through our border to Niger. Why? Because your citizens who have no value will not allow your policy to succeed. You know, the story is told of China. They built a very massive wall to protect China from invasion. And they said in 100 years, Chinese states were invaded twice. And the people who came in, they walked through the gate. How? They gave money to the soldiers who were keeping the gate, and they opened the gate and allowed the enemy to come in. This is the situation we are facing. And that's why I keep speaking to values of our people. Now, it is only when we have people of value, people who prioritize their nation, who have national interests at heart, patriotic people, when the government says, Benin Republic, fuel will not pass this border, the fuel will not pass. And when they are feeling the heat, they will bow to your pressure. So this is, for me, the only way it can happen. Meeting in ECOWAS or AU will not solve that. And I think that's where Nigerian diplomats, Nigerian foreign ministers must be strategic in terms of relating with their neighbors.
All right, before we go on break, let me make reference to what the Director General of the World Trade Organization said to Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Listen, she said, Africa is underperforming as it accounts for only 3% or less of
Increasing
global trade.
trade and investment
You're
in
talking of
value-added goods
Africa,
and
that is the second largest continent after Asia, and yet we are recording this kind of statistics. What do you think is actually the problem here? Global trade, we are recording less than 3%, as emphasized by the DG of WTO.
What's responsible? Sorry, we'll have to quote the Holy Book. My people perish for lack of knowledge. That's always responsible.
What kind of knowledge here?
Now, let's look at agriculture, for example. Look at the innovation and creativity in that sector. We can't even feed ourselves. We have to rely on Thailand to bring us rice, Ukraine to get wheat and sorghum. So, people are talking about precision agriculture today. That you can sit down in the office and you look at a plot of land and you can determine the yield that can come from it in terms of outcome. Has Africa been able to achieve that? No. Any groundbreaking research in medicine? No. Any groundbreaking research in pharmacy? No. So, what are we good at? We are good at nothing.
You can't say Africa is good at nothing, at least.
See, we
there are
have to
some
be
areas.
honest with ourselves.
Well, honestly, would it be that Africa is good at nothing? It can't be absolute nothing.
What are we good at? We want to be educated.
There are so many areas that Africa
Just
has
mention them so that it will become very easy. You see, even the trade we are talking about, this volume of trade we are talking about, and if you're going to look at the power behind it, you will see it's even the West that's driving it. Take, for example, the crude oil. I've said it here over and over again. The crude oil is here. If the people are not here to export this crude, we will not even have anything to sell.
But even in terms of human capital, for some of the developing countries, Africans have been instrumental to building.
No, don't turn history on its head.
No, it's not history.
You see, the point here is simple. When you say we are instrumental, yes, we have seen Africans or Nigeria excel elsewhere. They are excelling elsewhere because of the ecosystem that was created.
So it means that they are good at something.
It's not that we are good at something. Somebody is just exploiting and mining you to develop their resources. That's what it is. Let me give you one. Let me give you. Yes, we have the potential. That's what I'm saying. We have the potential. The potential to be world leaders. The potential to be world beaters. Because African is known for resilience. We have the power. We have the muscle. All we just need to do is to intellectually redirect our energy to things that are productive. Then you will see Africa emerge. And that is why what I'm saying is that, you see, all that is in Africa is potential. My history teacher told me something some years ago when I was in my undergraduate. And he said, while they were in Europe trying to read history of the world, they were teaching history to everybody. And then they taught the history of Asia, taught the history of Europe, history of America, and then they spoke about the history of colonialism in Africa. And then they asked the lecturer, I call his name Trevor Roper, and they said, when are you going to teach us the history of Africa? And he restarted, the history of Africa is the history of colonialism. Every other thing is darkness, and darkness is not a subject in history. So, this is how we're conceived in 1965.
But it's not totally true that every other thing before the colonial era is darkness.
Yeah, that was...
Because
that
even
was,
the history books say civilization started in
This was
Egypt.
the statement made by Professor Trevor Roper in 1965. That what you see, the only thing that you can glean is the contact you're having with the West. So this for me is the issue. We must, you see, there's a book written by Professor Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. He says the starting point where you start to break through to becoming great is when you are able to, number one, acknowledge or you face what he call the brutal facts. For me, the brutal fact here is the fact that we must tell ourselves simple truth. And what is this simple truth? That we are contributing nothing.
3% cannot be nothing.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Now, when you go and look at African contribution to the 3%, if you go and look at the 3%, you will see that what we're actually contributing could be 0.05%.
But that's not the statistics that we have.
No. Yes, because it's saying that this thing is done in Africa. You're seeing Chinese everywhere. You're seeing Indians everywhere. You're seeing Europeans everywhere. You're seeing American everywhere, helping this economy to grow. That's what you're seeing. And that's what is representing the 3%. That's what I'm saying. So what's our own value in terms of what is indigenous to us is almost zero. I am looking for that day that you're going to see that Africans are breaking through on research, that are pioneering. You see, people feel, professors in Nigeria university tell you and say, they don't accept us in our journal, their journals, because it's part of colonization. I said, no. If you find a solution, people will look for the solution. All right. You don't need, there's no color to it. If you have a groundbreaking solution to a problem, the world will look for you. So this for me is what it is. If Africa must lead, we must invest. We must invest. The paternalistic form of education in Nigeria, where it is only the professor that knows everything, had to stop. Okay. Children must be given the free hand to think and disrupt whatever so-called theories that the professors hold dear to their chest. And I think this is actually the thing that is pulling Africa back, where the professor sit down on a chair and everybody know nothing except the professor. And I don't think that is the way it is in the West. And that's what we need to mimic. And that is how Africa can be reimagined for economic growth.
Let's wrap up this conversation by looking at what Taiwo Oyedele also talked about, the issue of tax to GDP ratio. He talked about the need to raise it from 10% to 18%. As we speak, it's at 10%. And the plan is to raise it to 18% in the next 3 years. Do you see this becoming a reality, and what are some of the challenges that this could spring up?
Yeah, like I said before, it's very, for me, important that we're having a president who is determined to see Africa grow. And from what Taiwo said yesterday, we don't need to tax the seed. We need to tax only the fruits. And of course, you know that you have to first of all plant the seed and allow it time to flourish before you start to harvest. And that's very philosophical for me, coming from the president and based on the mandate that is given to the committee. And that's what Taiwo is also saying to civil society group, media group, to put pressure on the politicians. I underline that word. We need to put pressure on the politicians to allow some of these policies to thrive. We don't need new taxes, and he was very clear about that. It's no more taxes we need. All that we just need to do is to be able to harvest all these informal taxes that is happening at the state levels, local level, that is getting to the wrong hand, and allow them come into the coffers of government. If that is done, and I can bet you we don't need 3 years, in 1 year, our tax to GDP ratio can be up to 20-25%.
All right. The Africa Trade and Investment Summit had as its theme yesterday, reimagining economic growth in Africa. Looking at investments that come into Africa, is there a way to creatively target that to development that will transform Africa?
Yeah, I think when you look at the concept of reimagining, it means that you're saying, like Albert Einstein has said, that it's only a madman who will be doing the same thing and will be expecting a different outcome. There's a path that we have been towing for years, and it has not brought us any significant progress. So what the theme is for me is that what are the new ways we can think to rebuild Africa? And these are the new ways we're talking about. And I said here yesterday, all that we need is a simple thing. And I think Taiwo also alluded to it, is create that ecosystem that will be attractive to investment. We don't need to be junketing the continents of the world looking for foreign direct investment. Create an ecosystem that is fine, and once people see that there is opportunity for profit in your area, they will come. Did we invite colonial masters to come to Africa? We did not invite them. They came on their own. So why are we now going there to go and invite them to come and invest? There were things they saw in Africa that brought them in here. They needed pepper. They saw it was in Africa. Nobody told them to come. There was no plane traveling anywhere in the world before they came. They were looking for opportunity. They saw it in Africa and they took advantage of it. Why is it now we are now going to go and beg them to come and invest in Africa? That will not work. What will work is Africa must create an environment that will be so attractive for foreign direct investment that everybody in the world will say, this is a haven here, we want to come and do business here because there's opportunity in this place. That is the task that's before leadership, and that's what our government have to do.
All right. Finally, before we wrap up this segment, according to the DG of the World Trade Organization, that Africa only accounts for 3% of global trade. How can Africa increase that, having so many natural resources, but yet accounting for only 3% of global trade?
It starts with first feeding yourself. And that's the starting point for us as Africa. There's a whole lot of gaps in terms of food production in Africa. So which means African, we are not even able to feed ourselves. So we are depending on the Western developed nations to feed. This is a problem. So Africa must come of age to be able to feed itself first and foremost and provide for itself basic necessity that they need. That reduces the trade deficit. And then we can go and give food to people who are hungry in Europe. We can be giving food to people. If you go to UK today, government is trying to feed everybody. They are in trouble. African can give them food. And then we make so much money. But how do we require our research institutions to do their due diligence? Because Europe or UK will not take any food from you that is carcinogenic. So we must find a way through research to see all the carcinogenic elements, things that can create disease. We take them from the things that we are producing here so that they can access the world market. And if that is done, then you make more money and you contribute greater to world trade. That for me is the simple recipe.